Mexico operated Clipperton Island at the beginning of the 20th century in an effort to secure the territory. They sent military personnel, miners, and construction workers, some of whom had families. Within 10 years, there were about 100 people living on the small island, only about twice the size of Central Park in New York. But soon, ships stopped arriving from mainland Mexico. With the small population cut off from communication and resources dwindling, one man would use the opportunity to take control and he would quickly be labeled a tyrant. This is Monsters. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean lies a tiny, enigmatic landmass with a history as captivating as it is troubling. Clipperton Island, a remote coral atoll, has witnessed a saga of discovery, exploitation, and abandonment that spans centuries. This forgotten speck of land, barely visible on most maps, holds a story of human ambition, desperation, and survival that defies belief. The story of Clipperton Island begins with its discovery by European explorers in the early 16th century. On Good Friday, April 3, 1711, a French merchant arrived at the island, joined the following day by a fellow ship captain. Together, they created the first map of the island and claimed it for France. The French explorers initially named the island Ile de la Passion, or Passion Island in English, due to its discovery during Passiontide, which is the last 2 weeks of Lent. That name would stick for some time, but it's not the one we know today. The island's current name comes from John Clipperton, an English pirate and privateer who fought against the Spanish in the early 18th century. Legend has it that Clipperton used the island as a hideout during his exploits. While there's no concrete evidence of Clipperton actually setting foot on the island, his association with it was strong enough for the name to stick. In 1856, the United States passed the Guano Islands Act, a law that would have far-reaching consequences for many Pacific islands, including Clipperton. That act allowed U.S. citizens to claim unclaimed islands containing guano deposits in the name of the United States. It gave the president the power to use military force to protect those claims and establish U.S. jurisdiction over the claimed territories. The act led to the acquisition of around 94 islands by the United States, marking what some historians consider the first small beginnings of the American Empire. Under the act, American entrepreneurs were encouraged to search for and exploit new guano deposits on tiny islands and reefs in the Caribbean and Pacific. While the United States was expanding its reach through the Guano Islands Act, France was also making moves to secure Clipperton Island. In April of 1858, French Minister Eugene Rouer reached an agreement to claim oceanic islands in the Pacific for the exploitation of guano deposits. That led to Emperor Napoleon III formally annexing Clipperton as part of the French Protectorate of Tahiti on November 17, 1858. The French annexation drew angry reactions from Americans who saw it as a missed opportunity. Mexico's claim to Clipperton Island was rooted in its historical connection to Spain. After declaring independence in 1821, Mexico took possession of the lands that had once belonged to Spain, including Clipperton Island, which Spanish records noted as early as 1528. The Mexican Constitution of 1917 explicitly included the island using the Spanish name La Pasión as Mexican territory. In 1897, Mexico took decisive action to assert its claim. On December 13th, the gunboat La Democrata arrived at Clipperton with a group of Marines. They raised the Mexican flag and evicted the Americans who were working on the island, drawing a protest from France. From 1898 to 1905, the Pacific Islands Company worked the Clipperton guano deposits under a concession agreement with Mexico. The battle for Clipperton's guano deposits continued into the early 20th century, with both France and Mexico maintaining their claims. The dispute would remain unresolved for decades, leaving the tiny atoll at the center of an international tug-of-war driven by the valuable resource beneath its surface. In 1897, Mexico took a bold step by occupying Clipperton Island and establishing a military outpost. That move marked the beginning of a new chapter in the island's history, one that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In 1906, what appeared to be the start of a prosperous era began on Clipperton. The British Pacific Islands Company, in collaboration with the Mexican government, set about constructing a mining settlement. That included barracks, a small railway, and a lighthouse. They even brought in Italian and Chinese miners from San Francisco to work on the island. To solidify Mexico's claim, a military garrison was established on the island. Captain Ramon Arnaud was appointed as the first and only governor of Clipperton, a title he would hold for 10 years from 1906 until his death in 1916. The population of Clipperton grew steadily. By 1914, about 100 people called the island home. That community included miners, engineers, soldiers, and their families, women and children among them. Life on the island was sustained by regular supply shipments from Acapulco, arriving every 2 months with food, water, and other essential resources. A key development in the colonization effort was the construction of a lighthouse in 1906. That structure not only aided navigation but also symbolized Mexico's commitment to maintaining a presence on the island. However, the seemingly idyllic life on Clipperton was about to take a dark turn. As the Mexican Revolution erupted in 1910, the tiny community on Clipperton Island remained largely unaware of the turmoil unfolding on the mainland. The island's inhabitants continued their daily routines, relying on regular supply shipments from Acapulco every 2 months. However, the escalating conflict in Mexico would soon cause the tiny island to become lost in the shuffle. In January of 1914, the islanders' lifeline to the mainland was suddenly severed. Without any explanation, ships stopped arriving at Clipperton. The community, entirely dependent on those supply runs for food and information, found themselves in an increasingly precarious situation. As weeks turned into months, their cache of supplies began to dwindle rapidly. The British Pacific Islands Company, which had been operating on the island, withdrew its last employee. Britain ceased paying attention to Clipperton, while Mexico, embroiled in its own internal struggles, took increasingly little notice of the remote outpost. As the situation grew desperate, the island's inhabitants were forced to rely solely on the meager resources available to them. The once thriving vegetable garden had been lost to the harsh elements, leaving the colonists with a severely limited diet consisting mainly of birds, bird eggs, and fish. A few coconuts were available each week, but those proved insufficient to provide the necessary vitamin C, leading to the onset of scurvy, particularly among the adult men. By 1915, the population had dwindled to just 26 people. 13 soldiers, about 12 women and children, and a reclusive lighthouse keeper named Victoriano Alvarez. Captain Arnaud, the island's governor, found himself facing an impossible situation. Arnaud's reluctance to abandon the island, coupled with the lack of adequate resources for a potential escape, left the colonists trapped in their isolated hell. Their sole boat lacked sufficient fuel for the journey to Acapulco, and with only 5 men remaining, all suffering from malnourishment and vitamin deficiency, rowing to safety seemed an insurmountable task. As conditions worsened, death became a frequent visitor to the island. One by one, the inhabitants succumbed to illness and starvation. Their fellow islanders, in a grim ritual, buried the bodies deep beneath the sand to protect them from the island's voracious crabs. In a desperate attempt to seek help, Arnaud and 3 other soldiers set out in their rowboat after spotting what they believed to be a distant ship. Tragically, that decision led to their demise as they drowned in the unforgiving waves, leaving the remaining islanders even more vulnerable. In the wake of the tragedy, a new sinister chapter unfolded on Clipperton Island. With the death of Captain Arnaud and the other men who had set out in search of help, Victoriano Alvarez, the lighthouse keeper, emerged from his solitude. Seizing the opportunity presented by the absence of authority, Alvarez took control of the island's remaining population, which consisted of 15 women and children. Alvarez's first act was to consolidate his power. He gathered all of the weapons on the island and disposed of them in the sea, keeping only a single rifle for himself. That strategic move effectively disarmed any potential opposition and left the survivors defenseless against his whims. With no one to challenge him, Alvarez proclaimed himself the king of Clipperton Island. That self-appointed title marked the beginning of a dark era for the island's inhabitants, as Alvarez's rule would prove to be brutal and merciless. Alvarez's reign was characterized by unrelenting oppression. He declared that all the women on the island were his property, subjecting them to his twisted desires. The once unassuming lighthouse keeper transformed into a tyrant, unleashing a campaign of sexual assault and murder upon the helpless survivors. The children were not spared from Alvarez's brutality. He enslaved them, forcing them to carry out his bidding and meting out harsh punishments for any perceived disobedience. The island's inhabitants, already weakened by malnutrition and the harsh conditions, now faced the additional terror of Alvarez's unpredictable wrath. To maintain his control, Alvarez made examples of those who dared to defy him. In one particularly horrific event, when a 15-year-old girl and her mother refused his demands, Alvarez beat them both to death in front of the others. That brutal act served as a chilling warning to anyone who might consider challenging his authority. For years, the women and children of Clipperton Island endured that nightmare. Malnourished, frightened, and depressed, they lived under the constant threat of violence and abuse. Alvarez's reign of terror seemed unending, with no hope of rescue in sight. Despite the overwhelming odds, not all of the women succumbed to Alvarez's tyranny without resistance. Territorial, a 20-year-old woman, stood out for her defiance. She openly expressed her hatred for Alvarez and even spoke of killing him when among the other survivors. As Alvarez's brutality continued, the women began to realize that their only hope for survival lay in taking matters into their own hands. In July of 1917, an opportunity presented itself when Alvarez ordered Alicia Arnaud, the widow of Captain Ramon Arnaud, to report to his lighthouse the next morning. Seizing that moment, Alicia Arnaud and Territorial formulated a plan. The following morning, they approached the lighthouse together, finding Alvarez outside cooking a bird. As an argument ensued between Alvarez and Arnaud, Randon stealthily entered the lighthouse, armed herself with a hammer, and waited for the right moment to strike. In a swift and decisive action, Randon struck Alvarez in the head with the hammer. As he lay wounded on the ground, Arnaud and Randon obtained a knife and proceeded to end his life. That act of desperate courage brought an end to Alvarez's reign of terror and marked a turning point for the survivors of Clipperton Island. On July 18, 1917, the U.S. Navy gunboat Yorktown arrived at Clipperton Island. The ship's commander, Harlan Page Perrell, sent 2 men ashore and was surprised to see them return with a group of women and children. When his men made their report, Perrell later wrote that they revealed, quote, "a tale of woe absolutely harrowing in its details." The Yorktown's crew discovered that only 11 people had survived the ordeal on Clipperton Island, 4 women and 7 children. Those survivors were the last remnants of a colony that had once numbered 100. The last ship had visited the island 3 years earlier, and their supplies had run out 6 months after that. The rescue of Clipperton survivors marked the end of a dark chapter in the island's history. Commander Perrell, risking court-martial, made the decision to leave Alvarez's body to be devoured by crabs and omitted any mention of him from his official report. The entire crew of the Yorktown kept that secret for 17 years. In the aftermath of the rescue, France reasserted its claim to Clipperton Island. In 1931, King Victor Emmanuel of Italy acted as an arbitrator, granting sovereignty over the island to France. Mexico, which had not set foot on the island for 14 years, did not dispute that decision. The tragic events on Clipperton Island left a lasting impact. In 1934, the Island of Passion, as it was known, was erased from the Mexican Constitution. France rebuilt the lighthouse and sent a small military detachment to the island, which was dismantled in 1944. During World War II, the U.S. Navy secretly occupied Clipperton until the end of the conflict. Today, Clipperton Island stands as a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable hardship. Its history offers valuable lessons about the importance of communication, the dangers of isolation, and the need for compassion in extreme circumstances. As we reflect on this forgotten chapter of history, we're reminded of the delicate balance between human ambition and the harsh realities of nature, and the lasting impact that even the smallest places can have on the world stage. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.